Okay.
Good morning, everybody. This is Nevin Gusak, your host of New Ideas. With me is best-selling author and journalist David Cay Johnston. He is a frequent guest on numerous podcasts, and he has written about a myriad of subjects, including tax and economic policy. I first came across Mr. Johnston's work through his book, Free Lunch, as well as his appearance on the documentary Heist, made many years ago, which was a critique of market absolutism or neoliberal economic policies. And David is going to talk about his own political evolution to start out with, and then also his work interviewing Trump, his impressions. I have a feeling this is probably going to be a multi-session discussion. So welcome to the show, David. How are you doing?
Hi, Nevin. Thank you for having me.
I appreciate you appearing on the show. So, David, tell me about your political evolution. You've mentioned on other programs that you're a Republican, and let's unwrap that.
Yeah, well, no, what I've said is that this is no longer true. I was a registered Republican. And this came up because Lou Dobbs, who often had me on when he was at CNN before he went off into the strange places he did at Fox, Lou one night just asked me on TV my political registration, and it's public record. So I simply said, I'm a registered Republican. And all that meant is that I vote in the Republican primaries because where I live in Rochester, New York, the Republican primaries are much more interesting than the Democratic primaries. But it also was disarming to some people, I suppose. And it turned out to be kind of important when my book, Free Lunch, was reviewed by the New York Times, where I was a staff writer for many years. And the reviewer never told people what the book was about. It was about these massive subsidies to big corporations that were hidden in the public record. They were hidden in plain sight. It took me years to dig the material out of the public record, a lot of very boring reading of documents. And the review, as read by other people who called me, the New York Times book review comes out online on Wednesday. It's in the print paper on Sunday. The afternoon it came out at noon, I suddenly got 4 phone calls, one from my best friend and 3 from people I knew but not close, who all said, your newspaper just accused you of being an operative in the Democratic Party. And the review discussed a difference between 2 different groups. I didn't even know who they were because I don't pay attention to partisan politics historically. I'm a policy guy. And I read the review and I thought you can reasonably read it that way. But most importantly, the reviewer, Jonathan Chait from New York Magazine, never told people what the book was about. And he took a line and really distorted it. There was a line in which I said, is there anybody who hasn't said to themselves, I'm going to take this all the way to the Supreme Court? Because I've heard people their whole life. I've covered people as a journalist who have some legal case. And it's just an expression of anger at the system. And he turned that into, I want litigation. And I'll fault myself for not saying something more in the book. But in any event, I went into the office of the executive editor of the New York Times, Joel Eleveld. Went to his secretary, said, I need to see Joe right now. And she said, go on in. And I said, okay, Joe, if you think that I'm a partisan Democrat operative, you should fire me right now. And of course, he looked at me like, what are you talking about? And I told him about the review. He took a look at it. I had it with me. And he said, go talk to the book review editor and write a letter to the book review editor. So I did. And it was very troubling to me that the review would review a book without telling you what it's about. Because frankly, I regard that as the most important book I had written up to that time, and indeed up until my Trump books, because nobody knew at the time. I mean, you probably know, your listeners and viewers probably know now that big corporations get lots of their capital for investment from the taxpayers. They take it from the police and the fire department and the schools. Nobody knew that before my book. I mean, I can't say literally nobody, but there was no popular knowledge of that before my book. And it was incredibly damaging to the sales of the book. I mean, it was a bestseller, but it could have sold vastly more. And I have a pecuniary interest in that, of course, because it's what I do for a living on the side. And so anyhow, I have always been a policy person. I don't particularly care about partisan politics. My work, which goes back to 1966, has damaged or destroyed the careers of more Democrats than Republicans. It's just who I ended up writing about. Sometimes I get cranks who say, why didn't you write about Hillary Clinton? Why do you only write about Donald Trump? I don't know Hillary Clinton. I went to Atlantic City in 1988. That's why I know Donald Trump. I would never have gone to Little Rock because they couldn't afford me. The local papers in the South don't pay. And I had been at the Los Angeles Times, at the time, the best paying newspaper in the country. And then I went to the Philadelphia Inquirer, a big union staff newspaper. And on the other hand, by the way, Hillary Clinton tried to get me fired at the New York Times for my stories about, she suppressed initially with complaints, but a year later they got into the paper that she and her husband got bad legal advice. They didn't do anything illegal at all, but they ended up paying more than twice as much in federal income tax as the law requires over her books. Her book, It Takes a Village. Because they didn't handle the tax side of it properly. Mm-hmm. And she said she would neither make nor lose a dollar on the book. Well, I was able to prove that she gets in retirement now 3% larger check from Social Security. Not that that matters to the Clintons. It's a de minimis, irrelevant amount of money. But she, because of the royalties on the book being handled the way they were, her Social Security check's about 3% bigger. So she was going to get $2,000. She's getting $2,060, BFD. Mm-hmm. But throughout my career, people have made all sorts of assumptions about my work. For example, I'm often described by people, I've been on many talk radio shows where somebody goes, you're just a communist who hates business. And I go, no, you haven't read my books. I champion competitive market capitalism as the best idea we've come up with so far. Now, someday people may look back and go, oh, those foolish people in around the year 2000 who thought competitive market capitalism was everything. They were wrong, because somebody comes up with a new idea that we haven't seen yet, in the same way that capitalism didn't emerge until about 250 years ago. And competitive market capitalism, and I expose corporate socialism. But unfortunately, in America, most people are incredibly, appallingly ignorant about public policy, which I now I'm going to be teaching at Rochester Institute of Technology, where I'm a professor, about economics, about the law as it applies to trade and other issues. And just as I've spent most of my career pushing editors in directions that they did not expect to go because they're outside of the accepted norms of journalism, my audiences often presented with stuff that's, they completely new to them. It hasn't been in the news before. And all I can say about that is that I've got a track record back to 1966, and there's a single significant mistake in all those years. It was in a book, one of my Trump books, and it wasn't about Trump. It was about something else, and it was just a dumb mistake. It was just I was rewriting a sentence, and I must have been interrupted or something and didn't properly fully fix it. I said black was white, basically. It was a single word in 3 Trump books that were bestsellers. That was a mistake, and that's it in a career of all these years. Other than a document by the company that owns Fox News that was inherently misleading, and Fox, when I called them about it, did not in any way say to me, well, you should know this. And they literally apologized to me for their failure to point out that the document was inherently misleading. in the way it was crafted. That's it in 59 years, pretty soon.
Wow. That is an excellent summary, and I really appreciate that.